"Do not open that door," the old hunter had warned years ago. "If wolves ever beg instead of howl, destiny is standing on your doorstep." Emily Foster had laughed at those words when she was a little girl, believing they belonged to the same collection of mountain legends told around fireplaces every winter. Now, standing alone inside her small wooden cabin deep within the snow-covered forest, she realized legends sometimes arrived without warning. The wind screamed against the windows with enough force to shake the entire cabin, carrying thick sheets of snow that erased every familiar landmark beyond the glass. The nearest village was more than 12 miles away, and no traveler would willingly cross the mountain during a storm like this. Emily placed another log onto the fire before wrapping a heavy wool blanket around her shoulders. She had lived alone for almost 3 years, gathering medicinal herbs during the warmer seasons and helping nearby families with natural remedies whenever the weather allowed. Solitude had become familiar, even comforting. Yet something about tonight felt different. The forest sounded strangely quiet between the violent gusts, as though every living creature had disappeared. Then came the knock. It was soft, almost hesitant. Emily froze. Nobody knocked on doors in the middle of a blizzard. Another gentle knock followed, then another. Heart pounding, she lifted the iron lantern from the table and slowly approached the entrance. She expected to see a lost traveler or perhaps a frightened hunter searching for shelter. Instead, when she carefully pulled the wooden door open, the freezing wind rushed inside, carrying snow across the floor, and before her stood 6 enormous wolves. They were unlike any wolves Emily had ever seen. Frost covered their thick silver and charcoal fur, turning parts of their bodies almost white with ice. Their breathing was weak. Snow clung to their eyelashes, and their paws trembled from exhaustion. None of them growled. None showed their teeth. Instead, all 6 slowly lowered their heads in perfect unison. The oldest among them struggled forward one careful step before collapsing to one knee, as though every remaining ounce of strength had been spent reaching her cabin. His pale blue eyes met hers with unmistakable intelligence. There was no hatred inside them, only desperate hope. Emily should have closed the door immediately. Every lesson she had learned since childhood warned her never to trust wild wolves, especially during winter when hunger drove them closer to people. Yet these creatures did not look hungry. They looked broken. She noticed deep frost spreading across their legs as if the cold itself had begun trapping them in ice. One younger wolf tried to stand but stumbled again before lifting his eyes toward Emily with quiet determination. For a long moment, neither side moved. Snow continued swirling between them, while the fire behind Emily cast warm golden light across the frozen porch. Then something happened that made every story she had ever heard seem far too small. The oldest wolf bowed his head even lower and spoke in a faint, exhausted voice. "Please, Omega, let us come inside before winter claims us." Emily felt every breath leave her lungs. Wolves were not supposed to speak. Before fear could convince her to slam the door shut, compassion quietly reached her heart first, and with trembling hands she stepped aside, never imagining that the single choice she made during that storm would awaken a forgotten destiny hidden beneath the snow for generations. Emily Foster stood silently for several long seconds while the icy wind continued pouring through the open doorway. Every instinct warned her that allowing 6 enormous wolves into her cabin could be the worst decision of her life. Yet the trembling exhaustion in their pale eyes refused to match the terrifying stories she had heard since childhood. Slowly, she stepped farther aside. "Come in," she whispered, "before the fire loses the battle against this storm." One by one, the wolves crossed the threshold without the slightest hint of aggression. They moved carefully, almost respectfully, as though afraid of damaging anything inside the modest cabin. The oldest entered last, pausing briefly to look directly at Emily before lowering his head once more in silent gratitude. As she firmly closed the heavy wooden door against the blizzard, the cabin immediately became quieter, leaving only the crackling fireplace and the soft breathing of her unexpected guests. Emily gathered every extra blanket she owned and spread them across the wooden floor near the fire. She placed another armful of logs into the flames until warmth gradually filled the room. The wolves settled close together, their bodies still trembling as frost slowly melted from their thick fur. Small streams of water gathered across the floor, while the bitter ice coating their paws began disappearing. Emily hurried to prepare a kettle of hot herbal tea for herself before warming broth over the fire. She knew wolves did not drink tea, but warm broth might help restore some strength. Although she remained cautious, compassion guided every movement she made. After several quiet minutes, something extraordinary happened. The frost covering the oldest wolf's shoulders dissolved completely, revealing a silver crest naturally woven into his fur. He lifted his head and quietly spoke again, his voice now steadier than before. "You have shown us kindness when no one else would." Emily carefully knelt several feet away, making certain not to invade their space. "Who are you?" she asked softly. "And how do you know I am an Omega?" The 6 wolves exchanged brief glances before the oldest answered. "Because we have searched for you through every winter since the curse began." Emily frowned in confusion. "You must have the wrong person. I have lived in these mountains for years. I have never belonged to any royal pack." The wolf studied her face with remarkable certainty. "Names can be forgotten. Bloodlines cannot." Before Emily could respond, another wolf near the fire suddenly shivered as golden light surrounded him. She instinctively stepped backward in surprise. The light faded only moments later, revealing not another wolf but an exhausted young man wrapped in torn winter clothing. His dark blonde hair remained damp from melting ice, and he immediately pulled a blanket over his shoulders before respectfully bowing his head toward Emily. One after another, the remaining wolves experienced the same transformation until 5 weary young men sat quietly around the fireplace, while only the oldest remained in wolf form, apparently too weak to change. Emily stared in complete disbelief. Every childhood legend she had dismissed as impossible now stood breathing inside her own home. None of the men reached for weapons. None demanded anything from her. Instead, they accepted the bowls of warm broth she carefully handed them, thanking her with genuine humility. Finally, the youngest among them looked toward Emily with grateful eyes and spoke words that made the entire room fall silent. "Our Alpha King is dying beneath the frozen keep," he said quietly. "Before he lost consciousness, he ordered us to find the Omega whose kindness could save an entire kingdom. He described your face perfectly, even though he had never met you." Emily's heartbeat quickened. She had never traveled beyond these mountains, yet somehow a distant Alpha King had known exactly where to send his last remaining guardians, and deep within her heart, an impossible feeling began whispering that this storm had not brought strangers to her door by accident. Emily Foster remained motionless beside the fireplace, unable to look away from the 6 exhausted guardians who had arrived at her lonely cabin through one of the fiercest winter storms she had ever witnessed. Outside, the blizzard continued burying the forest beneath layers of fresh snow, but inside, another kind of storm had begun. Her entire understanding of the world had quietly collapsed within a single hour. She carefully poured more hot broth into the empty wooden bowls before placing fresh logs onto the fire. Warm light danced across the cabin walls while the oldest guardian finally found enough strength to transform into his human form. His silver hair reached his shoulders, and despite the exhaustion visible across his face, he carried himself with unmistakable dignity. He slowly stood before Emily and placed one hand over his heart. "My name is Gabriel," he said softly, "Captain of the Royal Guard of Frost Hollow. These men are the last protectors sworn to serve our Alpha King, Lucas Hawthorne." Emily quietly repeated the unfamiliar name. Frost Hollow. Gabriel nodded. It was once the most prosperous kingdom in the northern mountains. Rivers flowed through every valley. Forests remained green even during winter. Families traveled freely between neighboring packs, and no child feared the cold. His expression darkened as he looked toward the fire. Then the eternal winter arrived. The youngest guardian gently continued the story. "No one knows exactly how the curse began. Every year the snow spread farther. Entire villages disappeared beneath the ice. Crops failed. Rivers froze solid. People abandoned their homes, believing the moon goddess herself had turned away from us." Emily listened without interrupting. Their voices carried no exaggeration, only quiet sorrow. Gabriel carefully reached inside his worn cloak and removed a small leather pouch that had somehow survived the storm. From it, he unfolded a faded parchment, protecting it with remarkable care before placing it upon the table. Emily stepped closer. The old drawing showed a magnificent castle surrounded by snow-covered mountains. Beside it stood an enormous white tree whose glowing branches stretched toward the full moon. Her breath caught immediately. She knew that tree. She had seen it many times in dreams she never spoke about, dreams that always disappeared before sunrise. She slowly looked up. "Where is this place?" Gabriel answered without hesitation. "The Frozen Keep." Emily felt a strange chill despite the warmth of the cabin. "I have dreamed about this tree since I was a little girl." Every guardian exchanged astonished glances. Gabriel's eyes softened with quiet relief. "Then our king was right." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" Gabriel smiled faintly for the first time. His Majesty often spoke of a woman who had never met him, but always stood beneath the moon tree in his dreams. He believed she would appear when hope became impossible. Emily immediately shook her head. "There must be some mistake. I have never left these mountains." Gabriel gently folded the parchment. "Neither had he. Yet he described your face many years before we ever began searching." Silence settled over the cabin once again. Emily tried to explain away the impossible coincidence, but every answer created even more questions. Finally, she asked the one question that mattered most. "If your Alpha King somehow knew about me, why did he never come himself?" Gabriel lowered his eyes. "Because before we could find you, the curse reached him. He chose to seal himself inside the Frozen Keep so the darkness consuming the kingdom would stop spreading. Every day he remains there. The ice grows stronger while his life grows weaker." The fire crackled softly between them as Emily stared toward the snow-covered window. She had spent years believing her quiet life would never change beyond the familiar forest surrounding her cabin. Now 6 royal guardians sat beneath her roof asking her to journey toward a kingdom she had only visited in dreams. And somewhere beyond the endless blizzard, a dying Alpha King was waiting for someone he had somehow known long before destiny finally led them together. Morning arrived with surprising calm. The blizzard that had surrounded Emily Foster's cabin throughout the night had finally weakened, leaving the forest covered beneath a flawless blanket of untouched snow that reflected the pale winter sunlight. Inside the cabin, the 6 royal guardians had regained enough strength to stand without assistance, although the exhaustion in their faces revealed how close they had come to freezing beyond recovery. Emily quietly prepared another simple breakfast, while her thoughts never strayed far from the mysterious kingdom hidden somewhere beyond the mountains. Every answer the guardians offered only created new questions. After the meal, Gabriel unfolded the ancient parchment once again across the wooden table. This time he pointed toward a narrow passage winding between towering cliffs. "This is the only safe route to the Frozen Keep," he explained. "The journey normally requires 3 days on horseback. Because of the curse, it may now take longer." Emily studied the faded map carefully before looking toward the distant forest outside her window. She had never traveled farther than the neighboring valleys. Everything she had ever known existed within these mountains, leaving Mint abandoning the quiet life she had built with her own hands. Yet remaining behind Mint, ignoring people who had crossed a deadly storm, believing she alone could help them. She quietly walked to a small wooden shelf where several dried bundles of healing herbs hung from the ceiling. Methodically, she gathered medicinal roots, bandages, herbal oils, preserved food, warm blankets, and every useful supply that could fit inside a sturdy travel pack. None of the guardians interrupted her. They simply watched with growing gratitude as her decision slowly became clear. Before noon, Emily stepped outside one final time and looked across the peaceful clearing surrounding her cabin. She gently touched the rough wooden doorway, remembering the countless seasons she had spent here alone. Then she quietly locked the door, slipped the iron key beneath the familiar stone beside the porch, and turned back toward Gabriel. "If I come with you," she said softly, "I cannot promise that I will save your king." Gabriel respectfully lowered his head. "We are not asking for certainty. We are asking for hope." Together, they began their journey through the silent forest. The 6 guardians traveled cautiously around Emily, instinctively protecting her while allowing her complete freedom to choose each step. Hours passed beneath snow-covered pine trees whose branches sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. As daylight slowly faded, the mountains ahead finally emerged through the mist. Emily suddenly stopped walking. Far in the distance, Rising above frozen cliffs, stood an enormous castle carved almost entirely from ice and pale stone. Even from miles away, it looked strangely familiar. Her heartbeat quickened as forgotten fragments of childhood dreams quietly returned. She remembered climbing wide crystal staircases. She remembered moonlight reflecting across frozen towers. Most vividly of all, she remembered the magnificent white tree standing beside the castle exactly as it appeared upon Gabriel's ancient map. Emily whispered almost to herself, "I have been here before." Gabriel looked toward her with quiet understanding. "Not with your footsteps," he replied gently. "Perhaps only with your heart." As twilight settled across the mountains, the travelers finally reached the outer gates of the frozen keep. Massive walls of shimmering ice surrounded the silent kingdom, while thousands of delicate frost crystals glittered beneath the evening sky. Waiting at the entrance stood an elderly woman wrapped in elegant silver robes. The moment her eyes met Emily's, tears quietly filled them. She slowly smiled through overwhelming emotion before whispering words that left every guardian completely speechless. "Welcome home, Lady Emily. His Majesty never stopped believing you would arrive before the final snowfall." Emily Foster remained standing beneath the towering gates of the frozen keep while the elderly woman approached with slow, graceful steps. Snow drifted gently around them, yet the strange warmth in the woman's eyes immediately eased the uncertainty that had followed Emily throughout the journey. The woman placed one hand over her heart before bowing respectfully. "My name is Eleanor," she said softly. "I have served the Hawthorne family since before our king was born." Emily looked around the silent courtyard where magnificent towers of pale stone and crystal ice reached toward the gray winter sky. Although the kingdom carried extraordinary beauty, an overwhelming stillness rested over everything. The fountains remained frozen in elegant shapes, gardens slept beneath thick snow, and the few citizens crossing the courtyard wore expressions of quiet endurance rather than joy. It felt as though the entire kingdom had been holding its breath for many years. Gabriel and the 5 royal guardians respectfully followed Eleanor through wide marble corridors illuminated by glowing lanterns. Every hallway displayed portraits of former rulers, ancient banners, and intricate carvings of wolves standing beneath the same white tree Emily had seen in her dreams since childhood. She slowed her pace, studying each familiar image. "Why does everything here feel like a memory?" she asked quietly. Eleanor smiled with gentle sadness. "Some memories belong to the heart long before they belong to the mind." Eventually, they reached enormous silver doors decorated with delicate patterns resembling snowflakes and moonlight. Eleanor paused before opening them. "His Majesty has remained inside this chamber since the curse reached its strongest form." The heavy doors slowly opened without a sound. Emily stepped inside and immediately felt cool air surrounding the vast room. At its center stood a beautiful crystal platform carved from translucent ice. Resting peacefully upon it was a young man whose appearance carried quiet strength despite his deep, unnatural sleep. Lucas Hawthorne looked exactly as though he had merely closed his eyes moments earlier. His dark brown hair rested neatly across his shoulders. His expression remained calm, and his breathing was gentle but noticeably weak. Thin lines of shimmering frost covered portions of his hands and wrists, slowly spreading beneath his sleeves like delicate silver vines. Emily approached cautiously until she stood only a few feet away. She expected fear. Instead, she felt overwhelming familiarity. She had seen this face before, not in waking life, but inside countless forgotten dreams stretching back to childhood. Without thinking, she softly whispered his name. "Lucas." At that exact moment, a faint pulse of silver light moved through the chamber. Every lantern flickered together. The frost surrounding the crystal platform seemed to soften ever so slightly before becoming still once again. Gabriel looked toward Eleanor in astonishment. Neither spoke, but both understood they had witnessed something impossible. Emily slowly reached forward until her fingertips gently rested against Lucas's frozen hand. His skin remained cold, yet she sensed life beneath the silence. Suddenly another image flashed through her mind. She saw the moon tree glowing beneath a brilliant full moon, while a young boy smiled across a peaceful meadow before extending his hand toward her. The vision disappeared almost instantly, leaving Emily breathless. She stepped back in confusion. "I know him," she whispered. I do not understand how, but somehow I have always known him. Eleanor carefully opened a weathered leather journal resting beside the crystal platform. She turned to its final written page before handing it to Emily. The elegant handwriting belonged to Lucas himself. The final sentence had been written shortly before the ink abruptly ended. It read, "If the winter becomes stronger than I am, tell Emily Foster that I never stopped believing she would find her way home." Emily stared at the page while tears quietly filled her eyes, unable to understand how a man she had never met could have written her name long before destiny finally brought them together. Emily Foster remained beside the crystal platform long after everyone else had quietly stepped back, unable to take her eyes away from the final sentence written inside Lucas Hawthorne's journal. Her name appeared in graceful handwriting that had faded slightly with time, proving it had not been written recently. She gently closed the journal before looking toward Eleanor with countless unanswered questions. "How long ago did he write this?" she asked softly. Eleanor folded her hands together with quiet reverence. "Nearly 4 years ago," she replied. "The night before His Majesty sealed himself inside this chamber." Emily slowly looked back at the peaceful Alpha King resting beneath the thin layer of shimmering frost. For years earlier, she had still been living quietly inside her woodland cabin, gathering herbs and believing the strange dreams that visited her every winter meant nothing. She had never traveled beyond the neighboring valleys. She had never heard the name Lucas Hawthorne, yet somehow he had known hers. Eleanor gently led Emily toward an ancient reading room connected to the royal chamber. Shelves filled with carefully preserved scrolls surrounded a circular stone table where one enormous book rested beneath a protective glass cover. Gabriel carefully lifted the cover before opening the fragile volume. The pages contained beautifully painted illustrations of wolves, moonlit forests, and 2 ancient families standing together beneath the great white tree. Emily immediately recognized the symbols decorating the margins. They were identical to the delicate carving her late grandmother had kept above the fireplace inside the cabin. "My grandmother carved this symbol herself," Emily whispered in surprise. Gabriel nodded. "Because your family once belonged here." Emily looked at him in disbelief. "That cannot be true." Eleanor carefully turned several pages until an old family record appeared. 2 names had been highlighted in silver ink. One belonged to the Hawthorne royal bloodline. The other belonged to the Foster family. "Generations ago," Eleanor explained gently, "our 2 families protected one another through a sacred promise. Neither family ruled over the other. They shared knowledge, healing, and responsibility for keeping balance throughout these mountains. Every generation renewed that promise beneath the moon tree." Emily studied the faded illustrations with growing emotion. One painting showed a young healer standing beside an alpha ruler while 6 wolves guarded them beneath the glowing branches. Another showed both families celebrating together as spring returned after a harsh winter. "What happened?" Emily finally asked. Gabriel sighed quietly. "Someone betrayed that promise many years before either of us was born. Fear replaced trust. Families scattered across the mountains. Records disappeared. Many believed the alliance had become nothing more than a legend." Emily gently touched the edge of the page, feeling an unexpected sense of belonging she could not explain. Eleanor smiled kindly. "Your grandmother understood more than she ever revealed. She protected you by keeping you hidden until the proper time arrived." Emily remembered countless evenings beside the fireplace when her grandmother had insisted that kindness would one day guide her farther than strength ever could. At the time, those words seemed like simple wisdom. Now they sounded like careful preparation. Before anyone could continue, a faint sound echoed through the chamber. It was barely noticeable at first, like thin ice cracking somewhere beneath deep snow. Everyone immediately turned toward the crystal platform. The silver frost covering Lucas's hand had retreated another small distance, revealing more of his skin than before. Gabriel stepped closer with quiet amazement. "It has not moved in years," he whispered. Emily instinctively approached once again. As her fingers gently rested upon Lucas's hand, the silver light returned, brighter than before. For the briefest moment, Lucas's closed fingers moved almost imperceptibly around hers, and although his eyes remained shut, a faint warmth spread through his hand for the first time since the curse had begun, leaving everyone in the chamber silently wondering whether hope had finally awakened alongside the sleeping king. The faint movement of Lucas Hawthorne's fingers spread through the chamber like the first ray of sunlight after an endless winter. No one spoke. Gabriel, Eleanor, and the 5 royal guardians remained completely still, afraid that even the smallest sound might disturb the fragile miracle unfolding before their eyes. Emily Foster gently withdrew her hand, uncertain whether she had truly felt the warmth returning or whether hope itself had begun playing tricks on her heart. Then another quiet change appeared. The thin layer of frost surrounding Lucas's wrist slowly receded another inch before becoming still once more. Eleanor closed her eyes with silent gratitude. "For 4 years," she whispered, "we prayed for even the smallest sign that the curse could weaken. Nothing ever changed until the moment you arrived." Emily looked down at her own hands in disbelief. "I did not do anything." Gabriel smiled gently. "Sometimes kindness accomplishes what power never can." News of the unexpected change traveled quickly throughout the frozen keep. Before long, villagers, healers, and castle servants quietly gathered outside the royal chamber, not to celebrate, but simply to stand together with renewed hope. Emily noticed the difference immediately as she walked through the castle later that afternoon. Faces that had seemed burdened by quiet despair now carried cautious optimism. Children laughed for the first time in days while gardeners carefully brushed heavy snow away from sleeping flower beds, believing spring might still return. Even the castle musicians, who had long ago stopped performing, quietly tuned forgotten instruments within the great hall. Hope, Emily realized, often spread faster than fear when someone finally dared to believe. Determined to help in every way she could, Emily asked Eleanor to show her the royal greenhouse. Although much of it remained frozen beneath thick crystal ice, several sheltered rooms still protected rare healing plants that had survived the endless winter. Emily carefully examined each herb, preparing warming remedies for elderly villagers, strengthening tonics for exhausted workers, and soothing teas for frightened children. She never claimed to possess magical abilities. She simply shared the knowledge her grandmother had patiently taught her throughout countless peaceful afternoons inside their woodland cabin. Day after day, the people of Frost Hollow watched the young Omega move from home to home, offering comfort without expecting anything in return. Her compassion quietly transformed the atmosphere of the kingdom long before the curse itself had disappeared. Every evening, Emily returned to Lucas's chamber. She read passages from his journals aloud, believing that familiar words might somehow reach him beyond his mysterious sleep. She described the villagers rebuilding hope, the children playing in fresh snow, and the 6 loyal guardians who had never abandoned their king despite years of hardship. Although Lucas never opened his eyes, the silver frost upon his hands continued retreating little by little with every passing day. One quiet evening, while Emily finished reading another journal entry beneath the gentle glow of candlelight, she noticed something different resting beside the crystal platform. It was a small wooden carving shaped like the moon tree. Eleanor smiled softly when she saw Emily holding it. "His Majesty carved that himself many years ago," she explained. "He carried it everywhere until the night he sealed the curse inside himself. He said it reminded him that even the longest winter must one day surrender to spring." Emily carefully turned the carving over in her hands. Hidden beneath its base were 2 beautifully engraved words that immediately took her breath away. They simply read, "For Emily." No date accompanied them. No explanation followed. The carving had clearly been made long before anyone believed they would ever meet. And as Emily silently looked toward the peacefully sleeping Alpha King, she realized that whatever mysterious bond connected their lives had begun far earlier than either of them could possibly remember. Several peaceful days passed beneath the endless winter sky, and with each sunrise the kingdom of Frost Hollow seemed to awaken a little more from the long silence that had held it captive for years. Emily Foster continued visiting every corner of the castle and nearby village, bringing herbal remedies, warm meals, and simple words of encouragement wherever they were needed. She never claimed to possess extraordinary gifts. Instead, she listened to frightened families, comforted elderly villagers, and reminded exhausted workers that even the smallest sign of hope deserved to be protected. The 6 royal guardians watched quietly as the atmosphere around the kingdom slowly transformed. People who had once avoided gathering together now shared meals inside the great hall. Children laughed while building small snow sculptures outside the castle walls. Even the frozen marketplace welcomed merchants once again, each believing that perhaps the endless winter had finally begun to loosen its grip. Every evening, Emily returned to Lucas Hawthorne's chamber, reading another page from his journals while the candles filled the room with warm golden light. She spoke about everything she had witnessed throughout the day, almost as though he could hear every word despite remaining asleep. She described the smiles returning to the village, the greenhouse beginning to produce fresh herbs once more, and Gabriel's renewed determination as captain of the royal guard. As always, Lucas remained peacefully still, yet the frost covering his hands and arms continued retreating little by little, encouraging everyone who witnessed the gradual change. One quiet afternoon, while Emily organized old journals inside the royal library, she discovered a weathered wooden chest hidden behind several ancient volumes. Eleanor carefully unlocked it with a small silver key she carried around her neck. Inside rested dozens of letters, maps, and beautifully illustrated family records that had not been opened for many years. Emily gently unfolded one faded parchment and immediately recognized her own family crest beside the royal hawthorn emblem. Another carefully preserved page contained a painting unlike anything she had seen before. It showed a young healer standing beneath the moon tree while 6 wolves surrounded her in silent loyalty. Beside them stood a young alpha wearing the same royal symbol Lucas carried throughout the castle. Across the bottom of the illustration appeared a handwritten warning. The greatest danger will never come from winter itself. It will come when fear convinces good people to distrust the one sent to save them. Emily quietly reread the sentence several times. Eleanor sighed softly before speaking. That warning was written by the royal historian shortly before the alliance between our families disappeared. Before Emily could ask another question, hurried footsteps echoed through the library. Gabriel entered carrying an official letter that had just arrived from a neighboring settlement. His usually calm expression revealed unmistakable concern. Rumors have begun spreading beyond Frost Hollow, he explained. Someone is telling nearby packs that the curse grows stronger because an unknown Omega has entered the kingdom. They believe you are the reason winter refuses to end. Emily remained remarkably calm despite the accusation. Do the people here believe those stories? Gabriel slowly shook his head. Not the people who have met you, but others have never seen your kindness. Fear often travels faster than truth. Eleanor looked thoughtfully toward the old painting still resting on the table. The warning has begun unfolding exactly as it was written. Emily folded the parchment carefully before looking through the library window toward the snow-covered village below. She realized that healing the kingdom would require far more than weakening an ancient curse. It would also require helping fearful hearts discover the truth for themselves. At that exact moment, far across the frozen valley, a cloaked stranger quietly watched the castle from a distant ridge before turning away with a satisfied smile, believing the first seeds of doubt had finally begun taking root among those who had not yet learned who Emily Foster truly was. The following morning arrived beneath a pale silver sky, and although the endless winter still covered every mountain surrounding Frost Hollow, something had quietly changed within the kingdom. The people no longer looked only toward the frozen horizon. They looked toward one another. Emily Foster noticed neighbors sharing firewood without being asked, children carrying warm bread to elderly couples, and families gathering together inside the Great Hall instead of hiding alone in their homes. Hope had begun spreading through ordinary acts of kindness, and she realized that perhaps the curse had survived for so many years because fear had convinced everyone to stop trusting each other. Even so, Gabriel remained cautious. The letter warning about dangerous rumors continued weighing heavily upon his mind. Early that afternoon, another messenger arrived from a nearby settlement, confirming that strangers had been encouraging neighboring packs to believe the mysterious Omega inside Frost Hollow had awakened the ancient curse instead of weakening it. Emily listened quietly before asking a single question. Have any of those people come here to see the truth with their own eyes? Gabriel slowly shook his head. No. They have accepted stories without meeting the person those stories describe. Emily smiled gently. Then they do not know me. Fear often speaks before understanding has the chance. Rather than becoming discouraged, she continued helping the villagers exactly as she had every day since arriving. She joined the greenhouse workers harvesting the first healthy herbs to survive the harsh winter. She visited children recovering from illness, carrying warm soup and simple wooden toys carved by local craftsmen. She spent quiet hours reading beside Lucas Hawthorne, describing the laughter gradually returning throughout the kingdom. Every evening, the silver frost covering his hands continued retreating little by little, encouraging everyone who witnessed the steady change. Several days later, representatives from 3 neighboring packs unexpectedly arrived at the castle gates. They had not come to accuse anyone. They had come seeking answers. Eleanor welcomed them with dignity, while Gabriel invited them to walk freely through the village before any formal meeting began. The visitors expected frightened citizens and desperate conditions. Instead, they found people rebuilding gardens, repairing homes, and speaking with cautious optimism. Many quietly shared stories about the young Omega who never asked for recognition and always placed others before herself. One elderly villager smiled warmly while telling them, "She gave us courage before she ever offered medicine." Those simple words stayed with the visitors throughout the afternoon. As sunset painted the snow with soft shades of gold and amber, everyone gathered inside the great hall. Emily stood calmly before the guests without attempting to defend herself. Instead, she spoke honestly about compassion, responsibility, and the choice every person faced when meeting someone they did not yet understand. "Winter becomes stronger," she said gently, "whenever fear convinces good people to stop seeing each other as neighbors. I cannot ask anyone to trust me immediately. I can only continue choosing kindness every single day until the truth becomes impossible to ignore." Silence filled the hall. Then one visiting elder slowly stepped forward. He removed the silver pendant marking his position within his own pack and respectfully bowed his head toward Emily. "We traveled here expecting to discover the source of the curse," he said quietly. "Instead, we discovered the beginning of healing." At that exact moment, a warm breeze unexpectedly drifted through the open windows. Everyone turned toward the courtyard where several small white blossoms had emerged through the snow beneath the ancient moon tree, the first flowers anyone had seen since the endless winter began, leaving the entire kingdom wondering whether the land itself had finally begun answering the hope that had awakened within its people. The appearance of delicate white blossoms beneath the ancient moon tree became the quiet miracle everyone in Frost Hollow spoke about the following morning. For the first time in many years, people awoke with genuine anticipation instead of silent endurance. Families gathered outside before sunrise simply to see the fragile flowers still standing against the endless snow, their bright petals untouched by the freezing wind. Emily Foster walked slowly toward the tree with Gabriel, Eleanor, and the 6 royal guardians beside her. As she knelt to examine the blossoms, she realized they were identical to the flowers her grandmother had carefully grown beside their woodland cabin every spring. Eleanor smiled softly when she noticed Emily's expression. "Those flowers bloom only when the moon tree recognizes hope returning to the kingdom," she explained. "Many believed they would never appear again." Throughout the day, representatives from neighboring packs remained inside Frost Hollow, choosing to witness the gradual transformation for themselves rather than relying upon fearful rumors. They visited the greenhouse where fresh herbs now flourished despite the lingering cold. They watched villagers rebuilding homes together without asking which family belonged to which pack. Most importantly, they witnessed Emily quietly helping everyone she met with the same kindness she had shown from the moment she first opened her cabin door during the terrible storm. None of her actions sought admiration. She simply continued serving others because it was the only life she had ever known. As evening approached, Gabriel invited every visiting leader to gather inside the great council chamber. Ancient maps, weather journals, and preserved records covered the enormous stone table. Eleanor carefully placed the oldest family chronicle before them and opened it to the final unwritten page. "History is not only preserved through ink," she said gently. "Sometimes it continues through the choices living people make." One by one, the visiting elders acknowledged that fear had allowed suspicion to spread farther than truth. Instead of debating old grievances, they proposed restoring the alliance that had once united every northern pack beneath the moon tree generations earlier. Emily listened quietly, never attempting to lead the discussion. Yet every meaningful decision somehow returned to the compassion she had demonstrated since arriving. Before sunset, each representative placed the symbol of their own pack beside the hawthorn crest upon the council table, renewing the partnership their ancestors had once shared. The atmosphere inside the chamber felt lighter than it had in decades. After the meeting ended, Emily returned to Lucas Hawthorne's chamber carrying another of his journals. She read aloud about the renewed alliance, the villagers' growing optimism, and the flowers blooming beneath the moon tree. As the final words left her lips, a gentle breeze moved through the otherwise still room, although every window remained closed. Emily looked toward the crystal platform and noticed another remarkable change. The silver frost had completely disappeared from Lucas's hands and forearms. Color had returned naturally to his skin, and his breathing had become noticeably stronger. Gabriel stepped forward in astonishment, while Eleanor quietly wiped grateful tears from her eyes. Then, for the first time since the curse began, Lucas slowly opened his eyes. They remained calm, thoughtful, and filled with quiet recognition as they immediately found Emily standing beside him. His voice was soft from years of silence, yet every word carried unmistakable warmth. "You came," he whispered. Emily smiled gently, unable to explain why hearing those simple words felt less like meeting a stranger and more like finally finding someone her heart had been searching for long before either of them remembered their shared beginning. Lucas Hawthorne's first words echoed softly through the royal chamber, yet their quiet simplicity carried more power than any celebration the kingdom could have arranged. Emily Foster felt an unexpected calm settle over her heart as she looked into his clear blue eyes. There was no confusion in his expression, only recognition, as though he had finally awakened from a long journey whose ending he had always trusted would arrive. Gabriel and the 5 royal guardians respectfully stepped back, allowing the king and the young Omega a few peaceful moments while Eleanor silently offered thanks beneath her breath. Lucas slowly sat upright with their assistance. Although years beneath the curse had left him physically weak, the warmth gradually returning to his hands and the steady rhythm of his breathing revealed that life had truly begun flowing through him once again. Emily offered him a cup of warm herbal tea she had prepared only moments earlier. He accepted it with a grateful smile before quietly saying, "I imagined this moment countless times, but somehow reality is even kinder than my dreams." Emily lowered her eyes with a gentle smile. "I still have many questions." Lucas nodded. "So do I. But I believe the answers have been waiting for both of us." During the following hours, word of the king's awakening spread across Frost Hollow faster than the morning sunlight. Bells that had remained silent throughout the years of endless winter rang once again from every tower. Families gathered throughout the village square, embracing one another with joyful tears as children laughed beneath the gently falling snow. Yet Lucas asked that no grand celebration begin immediately. Instead, he requested to meet the people quietly, wishing first to thank those who had endured every difficult season together. Supported by Gabriel, he slowly walked through the castle courtyard where villagers greeted him not with loud cheers, but with heartfelt gratitude. Lucas stopped often to speak with elderly couples, craftsmen, gardeners, and children, listening carefully to their stories of perseverance. He thanked each person individually, insisting that the kingdom had survived because ordinary people had chosen compassion even when hope seemed impossible. As sunset approached, Lucas and Emily walked together toward the ancient moon tree accompanied by Eleanor and the 6 royal guardians. The delicate white blossoms had multiplied throughout the day, surrounding the massive roots with quiet beauty. Lucas looked upward into the glowing branches before turning toward Emily. When the curse first appeared, he explained gently, "I searched every ancient record inside the royal library. Every path eventually led to one truth. The kingdom could not be restored through power alone. It required someone willing to open a door when fear said it should remain closed." Emily immediately remembered the storm, the 6 frozen wolves, and the moment compassion had overcome hesitation inside her small woodland cabin. Lucas smiled as though reading her thoughts. "You made that choice without knowing who we were. That is why the moon tree answered you." Before either of them spoke again, a warm breeze swept gently across the courtyard. The snow covering the ground around the ancient tree began quietly melting, revealing fresh green grass beneath. Tiny streams of clear water flowed peacefully between the roots while birds returned to the branches above for the first time in many years. Everyone watched in silent amazement as winter slowly surrendered to spring. Eleanor's eyes filled with grateful tears. Gabriel bowed his head with quiet relief. Yet Lucas continued watching the changing landscape with thoughtful concern rather than celebration alone. "The curse is ending," he said softly. "But one final promise still remains unfinished." Emily looked at him curiously. Lucas reached into the pocket of his royal coat and carefully unfolded an ancient parchment bearing the seals of both the Hawthorne and Foster families. The faded document had remained unsigned for generations, and at the bottom, 2 empty spaces waited beneath a single sentence that would determine the future of every northern pack. Lucas Hawthorne carefully unfolded the ancient agreement beneath the glowing branches of the moon tree, while everyone gathered around in respectful silence. The weathered parchment carried the seals of the Hawthorne and Foster families, preserved through generations despite years of separation, hardship, and forgotten history. Emily Foster accepted the document with gentle hands, studying the elegant handwriting that filled its pages. It was not a treaty promising power, wealth, or territory. Instead, it described a simple promise made centuries earlier. The Alpha rulers would protect every family living beneath the northern mountains without demanding loyalty through fear, while the Foster healers would preserve compassion, knowledge, and hope whenever darkness threatened the kingdom. Neither family stood above the other. They served together so every pack could prosper in peace. Emily slowly looked toward Lucas. "This promise was never about ruling," she said quietly. Lucas smiled with warm understanding. "It was always about responsibility." Eleanor stepped forward carrying an old silver pen that had been passed from one generation to the next. "Every leader before you hoped this day would come," she whispered. "Not because they wished to restore an ancient tradition, but because they believed future generations deserved to inherit trust instead of suspicion." Emily signed her family name first. Lucas added his signature beside hers. As the ink settled upon the parchment, the moon tree released thousands of glowing white petals that drifted peacefully through the courtyard like gentle snowfall. The earth beneath everyone's feet seemed to awaken. More green grass appeared across the castle grounds. Frozen streams began flowing once again, and distant birds filled the air with songs that many children had never heard before. Throughout Frost Hollow, people stepped outside their homes in amazement as sunlight finally broke through the heavy winter clouds. Snow slowly melted from rooftops without causing destruction, revealing colorful gardens that had slept beneath the ice for years. The greenhouse flourished almost overnight as herbs, flowers, and fruit trees responded to the changing season. Farmers smiled while touching rich soil they believed had been lost forever. The 6 royal guardians stood together watching the transformation with quiet gratitude. Gabriel turned toward Emily and bowed respectfully. "The night we reached your cabin, we believed we were searching for someone who could save our king," he said. "We now understand that you helped save every one of us long before we reached these gates." Emily gently shook her head. "You chose hope by continuing your journey through the storm. I only opened a door." Lucas looked across the recovering kingdom before addressing the gathered representatives from every neighboring pack. "Let this be remembered," he said calmly. "The winter ended not because one person possessed extraordinary strength. It ended because kindness inspired trust, trust restored unity, and unity gave every heart the courage to believe again." The visiting leaders nodded in agreement, promising to rebuild friendships that fear had broken apart years before. As evening settled across the mountains, warm golden light reflected through the castle windows instead of endless gray skies. Emily quietly realized that the kingdom no longer felt unfamiliar. The dreams that had once confused her now felt like gentle memories guiding her toward the place where her family's promise had always belonged. Yet as she looked once more at the ancient parchment resting safely beneath the moon tree, she noticed a final sentence that had only now become visible beneath the fading silver ink, suggesting that the remarkable journey bringing Emily and Lucas together had begun even earlier than anyone had ever imagined. Emily Foster gently lifted the ancient parchment once more beneath the glowing branches of the moon tree, her eyes resting upon the final sentence that had remained hidden until the sacred promise was renewed. The elegant silver letters slowly appeared as though awakened by the returning light of spring. They read, "When compassion opens the forgotten door, two families shall become one again, and the northern mountains shall remember peace." Emily quietly smiled before handing the document to Lucas Hawthorne. He read the words in silence, then looked across the valley where snow had almost completely disappeared. Rivers flowed freely once again, green hills stretched toward the horizon, and birds circled above the castle towers as though they had finally found their way home. Eleanor wiped away grateful tears while Gabriel and the 5 royal guardians exchanged relieved smiles that carried the weight of many difficult years. Frost Hollow no longer resembled the kingdom they had fought so hard to preserve. It had become something even greater, a place where hope had returned through ordinary acts of kindness rather than fear or force. During the following weeks, neighboring packs arrived from every direction, not to negotiate uneasy truces, but to celebrate the renewal of friendships that had once united the northern lands. Farmers exchanged seeds, healers shared knowledge, craftsmen rebuilt forgotten bridges, and children played together without caring which pack their families belonged to. Lucas walked among his people every day, listening more than speaking, determined to lead with humility rather than distance. Emily continued visiting homes, tending gardens, teaching young healers, and offering comfort wherever it was needed. Although many people began calling her the future Luna of Frost Hollow, she quietly remained the same compassionate woman who had once lived alone inside a small woodland cabin. One peaceful evening, Lucas invited Emily to stand with him beneath the fully restored moon tree. The 6 royal guardians formed a respectful circle nearby, while Eleanor carried the restored family agreement inside an elegant wooden case that would protect it for generations. Lucas turned toward Emily with a warm smile that reflected both gratitude and quiet admiration. "The kingdom has welcomed spring," he said softly. "Our people have rediscovered one another. None of this would have happened if you had listened to fear instead of compassion on the night we reached your door." Emily looked toward the distant mountains where her little cabin rested beyond the forest. "That cabin gave me a peaceful life," she answered gently. "But opening its door gave me a greater purpose than I ever imagined." Lucas carefully extended his hand. "Then allow me to ask one final question, not as your king, but simply as Lucas. Will you remain beside me as we protect this kingdom together, so that future generations inherit trust instead of fear?" Emily placed her hand in his with quiet confidence. "Yes," she replied. "Not because destiny expected it, but because every choice that brought us here proved that kindness is always worth choosing." As though answering her words, the moon tree released another shower of glowing white petals that drifted peacefully across the valley, while warm spring breezes carried them through every village of the northern mountains. The people looked toward the sky and smiled, understanding that the endless winter had truly ended. Years later, parents would tell their children that the greatest miracle in Frost Hollow had never been the breaking of an ancient curse. It had been the simple decision of one compassionate Omega who opened her door to 6 frozen wolves on a desperate winter night, proving that a single act of mercy could change not only one life, but the future of an entire kingdom forever.